I want you to picture the most famous poster you've ever seen in a history classroom.
Oh, I think I know exactly the aesthetic you mean.
Right. You know the one. It's usually this like sepia-toned or maybe black and white portrait of a really stoic Native American leader.
Gazing off into the distance, usually.
Exactly. Gazing off into the distance. And right beneath that portrait, inscribed in this beautiful flowing script, is just this devastating quote.
Yeah, those quotes are unforgettable.
They really are. I mean, they perfectly distill the sheer tragedy of American expansion. But specifically, I want you to picture the poster that has this exact quote. Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
It says, quote, "They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it."
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is arguably, the most famous, most frequently cited piece of Native American oratory in existence.
It really is.
I mean, you'll find it in these highly acclaimed documentaries, you find it in university textbooks, and it's endlessly shared across social media today.
All the time.
Yeah.
And, usually when we consume historical documents, especially ones with that kind of cultural weight, there's this underlying expectation of precision.
Right.
Like you expect that some historian can just march into the National Archives, pull a treaty or transcript out of a drawer, look at the faded ink, point their finger at a specific line and just be like, there it is. That's exactly what happened on this exact day.
Yeah, exactly. We crave that binary certainty. We really want our history written in ink, dated, signed by witnesses, neatly filed away.
It feels clean.
It does. It gives us this sense of control over the past.
It's deeply comforting to think of history as just perfectly categorized. But then you step out of the archives and into the actual reality, what happened on the ground after those treaties were signed.
I think it's messy.
So messy. That
Yeah.
pristine archival machinery just breaks down completely. The historical landscape becomes incredibly, frustratingly murky. Because here is the massive twist regarding that famous quote I just read.
The one about the broken promises?
Yes. We have absolutely no verifiable idea who actually said it.
Which is, it's the absolute definition of historical muddy waters.
It really is.
Was it the great Oglala Lakota leader Red Cloud speaking in his old age to some reporter?
Maybe.
Or was it the Hunkpapa Lakota leader Sitting Bull talking to an army officer? The unsettling truth here is that there is no verifiable historical origin point for this quote.
None at all.
There's no date, no specific location, there's no shorthand transcript from the moment it was spoken, and no contemporaneous newspaper article that anchors those exact words to a specific human being.
And that profound uncertainty brings us directly to the mission of our deep dive today.
Right.
If you've been following this topic with us, you know we've spent so much time examining this endless string of broken treaties, but mostly through the lens of, United States statutes.
Yeah, massive land cessions, dense Supreme Court opinions.
Sweeping presidential decrees.
Yeah.
We've been staring intently at the paperwork generated by the people who broke the promises. So today we're turning the microphone around to the counterparties.
Exactly. What did the Native leaders actually say when those promises failed?
But before we dive in, we have to establish some ground rules for how we're approaching this material.
Absolutely. This is a measured documentary exploration. We are going to treat these statements from Native leaders as serious, dignified, and highly sophisticated political speech.
Right. We are strictly avoiding the realm of folklore here.
Yes, no indulging in some romanticized 19th century idea of, mystical Indian eloquence.
Right.
The people we're talking about were hardened political and military leaders. They were responding to sheer existential crises. They were negotiating the survival of their nations.
But the driving tension of this entire deep dive, the structural problem you have to keep in the front of your mind for every single quote we analyze today, is the mechanics of how we're hearing these voices.
Because we're almost never hearing them directly.
That's the central paradox. Nearly every single statement we possess comes to us through a profound filter.
Multiple filters, really.
Yeah. These voices were filtered through white transcribers. They were filtered through interpreters of wildly varying skill levels and motivations.
They were filtered through U.S. Army officers who had literally just been shooting at them.
Right.
And through ambitious newspaper reporters looking to sell copy, and through East Coast editors who knew exactly what their Victorian audiences wanted to read.
In other words, the historical record of these Native voices was shaped, curated, and sometimes entirely manufactured by the very civilization that broke the promises in the first place.
Exactly.
Think about how you consume news today. if you see a quote from a foreign dissident or a political prisoner translated in your social media feed, you generally assume it's roughly accurate, right?
Because there are independent journalists verifying it.
Exactly. But I want you to imagine a completely different scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine you're trying to get your most desperate, urgent political plea heard by the world.
Your life is on the line.
Your life, your family's life, your entire community's future is on the line. But the only way you are allowed to communicate is through the pen of your absolute worst adversary.
It's terrifying.
The person writing down your words, translating your grief, and deciding what gets published is the exact same person who just violently took your home.
How much of you actually survives on that page?
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to start with the anchor. We're starting with the most reliably documented native testimony we have, which comes from Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, or the Nimipu people.
Chief Joseph is just the ideal starting point because he gives us a master class in how to navigate these filters.
He really does.
We actually have his testimony in two radically different forms under two radically different circumstances. But to understand the mechanics of what he was doing, you have to understand the geopolitical context of 1877.
Right, set the scene for us.
This was the year Joseph's band of Nez Perce adamantly refused to be forcibly removed from their ancestral homeland in the Wallowa Valley. That's in what is now Oregon.
And their refusal triggers one of the most grueling, just logistically staggering military pursuits in American history. We aren't talking about a brief skirmish here.
Not at all.
Chief Joseph, alongside roughly 700 of his people, and we need to be clear here, this was mostly women, children, and the elderly. Right?
Yeah, only about 200 actual warriors.
Right. They made a fighting retreat of roughly 1,500 miles.
1,500 miles. To put that into perspective, they were traversing incredibly difficult mountainous terrain.
Across multiple states.
Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana. And they were constantly fighting off multiple columns of the fully mechanized U.S. Army, outmaneuvering experienced generals along the way.
It's incredible.
They were trying to reach safety in Canada, hoping to join Sitting Bull, who had sought refuge there after the Battle of the Little Bighorn the year prior.
The logistical nightmare of moving an entire community that distance while under constant artillery and cavalry fire is almost unfathomable.
It's a marvel of military strategy, honestly.
But they were finally cornered. Just about 40 miles shy of the Canadian border near the Bear Paw Mountains in Montana, they were besieged in freezing conditions.
It was early October 1877.
The people were starving, they were freezing to death in the snow, and many of the key leadership had already been killed. And this brings us to October 5th, and the first highly famous piece of testimony we need to dissect.
Yes, this is the legendary surrender speech.
Right.
According to the historical record, Joseph rode out to meet General Nelson A. Miles and General O. Howard. The text that was ultimately recorded and published ends with these specific rhythmic lines.
The ones everyone knows.
Right. Quote, "I am tired, my heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever."
It is undeniably moving. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. I mean, it hits you right in the chest.
It really does.
But let's look at the mechanics of the filter we just talked about.
Yeah.
How did those exact words get from a freezing, chaotic battlefield in Montana in 1877 onto the printed page?
What's fascinating here is the actual physical chain of custody of those words. First, we have to acknowledge the linguistic barrier.
Because Chief Joseph obviously did not speak English.
Right. He spoke his native Nimipu language. So he had to speak through an interpreter, a man named Arthur Chapman.
Okay, so that is filter number one.
Exactly. But the person who physically wrote the words down, the man actually holding the pencil and the notepad, was Lieutenant Charles Erskine Scott Wood.
An Army lieutenant.
Yes. And Wood was a direct aide to General O. Howard, the very general who had been relentlessly pursuing Joseph across those 1,500 miles.
So you literally have an Army aide taking the dictation of the surrender.
Yes, but Lieutenant Wood was not just some military bureaucrat. He was a highly educated man who, later in his life, actually became a published, recognized poet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The text we have, the one everyone quotes, was published in Harper's Weekly magazine just about a month later, in November 1877.
So it was blasted out to a national audience almost immediately.
Exactly. Now, historians have spent decades dissecting this moment. They point out that while the substantive reality of the surrender is undoubtedly authentic, I mean, Joseph was surrendering, he was exhausted, his people were dying of exposure, the specific poetic cadences of that speech are highly suspect.
Wait, really? The phrasing itself?
Yes. If you listen to the rhythm of "From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever," you are hearing perfect iambic rhythm.
Oh, man. You're right. They, them, they didn't.
It is a highly polished literary construction. It is highly probable that Wood, the aspiring poet, took the rough translation provided by Chapman and smoothed it out before submitting it for publication.
The poet just couldn't help himself.
He really couldn't.
He smoothed out the raw edges to make it resonate with a national magazine audience. He made it sound exactly the way a Victorian readership expected a tragic, noble, defeated chief to sound.
That's it exactly. We have the grim historical reality of the surrender, but it has been carefully wrapped in a literary package designed to appeal to the romantic sensibilities of East Coast readers.
The grief is real, but the syntax is an invention.
Exactly.
Which is exactly why we need to pivot to the true centerpiece of our deep dive today. Because Joseph realized something profound.
He realized that relying on battlefield scribes was a losing strategy.
Totally. So 2 years later, in 1879, Chief Joseph did something utterly extraordinary. He didn't just speak on a battlefield.
No, he did not.
He physically traveled to Washington, D.C. He secured a meeting with the sitting president, Rutherford B. Hayes, alongside cabinet members and congressmen.
Which is incredible in itself.
And most importantly, to bypass the military filter entirely, he sat down and gave an extensive interview that was published as a massive essay titled An Indian's View of Indian Affairs.
And he didn't just publish it anywhere, he published it in the North American Review.
I really want you to explain the mechanics of the North American Review in 1879, because we really need to understand the scale of what Joseph accomplished here.
Right. To understand the North American Review at that time, you have to think of it as the absolute premier intellectual, literary, and political magazine in the United States.
The gold standard.
It was the mainstream national forum for serious debate. We are talking about a publication where sitting presidents wrote op-eds, where leading philosophers and titans of industry debated policy.
So everyone who was anyone read it.
It was read by every senator, every judge, every wealthy industrialist in the country. For Chief Joseph to successfully place a massive essay in that specific publication was a deliberate, highly calculated, and direct political claim on the American public square.
He's basically saying, I am not going to let a poet in an army uniform write my legacy. I'm going straight to the American reading public, and I'm going to use your most prestigious intellectual platform to do it.
Exactly. Now, we have to be intellectually honest here. It was still mediated.
Right.
Joseph was speaking through an interpreter, and the essay was transcribed and edited by the magazine's staff, led by a man named William Hayes Ward.
So there's still a filter.
Yes. But the critical difference here is the intent and the environment. This was not a rushed, frantic translation delivered in the freezing cold while surrounded by soldiers with rifles.
Right. There was an artillery firing in the background.
Exactly. This was a deliberate, structured interview process. The essay was published as Joseph's considered, authorized legal argument. It is unambiguously in the public domain, and it is arguably the closest thing we have to a native voice speaking on its own chosen terms to the very nation that broke the treaties.
We're going to read from this generously because the sheer power of this document deserves to breathe.
Please do.
I want you to listen to how Joseph systematically dismantles the sheer emptiness of the official diplomatic language he had been force-fed for years. He wrote, "Good words do not last long unless they amount to something. Words do not pay for my dead people. They do not pay for my country now overrun by white men. They do not protect my father's grave. They do not pay for all my horses and cattle."
Words do not pay for my dead people. That is such a stark, surgical indictment of the entire United States treaty system.
It gives me chills.
He is directly attacking the bureaucratic architecture of the government. He is pointing out that the endless congressional commissions, the stamped documents, the verbal promises from generals, they meant absolutely nothing on the ground.
They were just administrative noise covering up the reality of theft.
Precisely.
And he specifically names the hypocrisy of the military commanders. He talks about General Nelson Miles, who had initially offered him specific terms of surrender at Bear Paw.
Right. Terms stating his people could return to the Pacific Northwest.
Exactly. Which the government in Washington subsequently overruled and broke, shipping the Nez Perce to a miserable exile in Kansas and later Indian Territory.
But the betrayal was absolute.
Joseph writes, "It makes my heart sick when I remember all the good words and all the broken promises. There has been too much talking by men who had no right to talk."
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, The most crucial part of this 1879 essay is not just the profound expression of grief, and it isn't even the pointing out of federal hypocrisy.
What is it then?
The true brilliance of this document is the core legal argument he constructs at the very end.
Yes. Okay, this is the part that completely rewired my brain regarding how I view this era of history.
It's astounding.
He doesn't ask for pity. He demands equal legal standing under the Constitution. I'm going to read this section, and I really want you to pay attention to the mechanical framing he uses here.
Listen closely to this.
Joseph says, if the white man wants to live in peace with the Indian, he can live in peace. There need be no trouble. Treat all men alike. Give them the same laws. Give them all an even chance to live and grow. Let me be a free man, free to travel, free to stop, free to work, free to trade where I choose, free to choose my own teachers, free to follow the religion of my fathers, free to think and talk and act for myself, and I will obey every law or submit to the penalty.
Treat all men alike. Give them the same laws.
It's so direct.
You have to recognize what he is doing mechanically here. He is taking the foundational, sacred language of the American Republic, the underlying promises of the Declaration of Independence and the Equal Protection Principles, and he is weaponizing them against the United States government.
He really is.
He is speaking to the readers of the North American Review in their own philosophical language.
It's intellectual judo.
That's a great way to put it.
I was thinking about this, and the closest modern analogy I can come up with is like a political prisoner. Someone currently being held indefinitely in Guantanamo Bay without trial. Somehow managing to get a prime 3,000-word op-ed published in the Sunday edition of the New York Times.
That analogy is spot on.
Right. Think about the level of strategic brilliance required to take the dominant culture's most prized platform and use it to systematically dismantle their legal and moral justifications for holding you.
Exactly. Notice the verbs he uses. Free to travel, free to stop, free to trade, free to work.
He's not demanding to turn back the clock.
No, he's not demanding a return to a pre-colonial past. He understands that the world has changed. He is explicitly demanding the mechanics of liberty required to survive in a capitalist democratic society.
Right.
He is looking at the American legal system and saying, apply your own rules to me, give me the exact same legal rights as any white citizen, and I will happily abide by your laws.
Which honestly makes me so deeply frustrated with how we teach this history in schools.
Oh, completely.
When we are taught about these leaders, we are almost exclusively presented with imagery of defeat. The quintessential image is the exhausted warrior on horseback, head bowed in the snow, handing over a rifle.
The tragic end.
But here is Chief Joseph acting as a sophisticated, modern legal strategist, sitting in a parlor in Washington, D.C., writing rigorous policy arguments for the North American Review. Why on earth doesn't this version of Joseph get taught?
Well, this raises a really important question about how societies consume their own history.
Yeah.
The harsh truth is that the image of the tragic, vanquished, noble savage is much more comfortable for the dominant American culture to digest.
That's less threatening.
Exactly. It evokes a safe, melancholic pity. But the image of a brilliant native legal mind pointing out the glaring structural hypocrisies in American jurisprudence, that is threatening.
All right.
If you teach the polished, poetic surrender speech, the reader gets to feel a passive sadness about the inevitable march of progress. But if you teach the 1879 essay, you have to actively answer for why the United States fundamentally refused to grant equal protection under the law to the people whose land it occupied.
That is a phenomenal point. The demand for equal legal standing forces a reckoning.
It absolutely does.
And Joseph's attempt to leverage the press to secure that legal standing leads us directly into a parallel strategy happening at the exact same time.
Yes, in the very same year.
Because Joseph proved that leveraging the media isn't enough on its own. The words in a magazine matter, but without a legal enforcement mechanism, they just evaporate. Which forces us to ask, what happens if a native leader bypasses public opinion entirely and goes straight for the throat of the U.S. legal system?
And that brings us to our second story, which takes place in that exact same year of 1879 inside a federal courtroom.
Okay, set this up for us.
This is the landmark story of Standing Bear, a principal chief of the Ponca people. To understand the mechanics of his legal fight, we have to look at the bureaucratic nightmare that engulfed the Ponca in 1877.
Right. The Ponca had been living peacefully on a reservation in Nebraska, territory that was explicitly guaranteed to them by treaty.
Yes.
But due to just a staggering administrative blunder by the U.S. government, Their land was accidentally given away to the Sioux in a completely different treaty.
A literal paperwork error.
And instead of fixing the paperwork error, the government decided to forcibly remove the Ponca from Nebraska and march them south to Indian Territory, which is present-day Oklahoma.
And the physical realities of this forced removal were catastrophic. They were marched over 600 miles in terrible weather.
Just horrific conditions.
Once they arrived in Indian Territory, the conditions were abysmal. The land was unsuitable for their farming practices, malaria was rampant, and the government completely failed to provide the promised rations or medical care.
It was a death sentence.
It was. Within roughly 2 years, between a quarter and a third of the entire Ponca tribe had died.
And among the dead was Standing Bear's own teenage son, Bear Shield. Now, before his son died, Standing Bear made a promise to him.
A very specific promise.
He promised he would not leave his bones in that strange land, but would carry him back and bury him in the traditional Ponca homeland in Nebraska.
Right.
So in the dead of winter in early 1879, Standing Bear and a small starving party of about 30 people left Indian Territory and began the agonizing walk north, carrying the remains of his son.
But under the federal policies of the time, Native people were strictly confined to their assigned reservation.
You couldn't just leave.
No, leaving without permission from an Indian agent was highly illegal. So when Standing Bear and his party reached the Omaha Reservation in Nebraska, they were intercepted and arrested by the U.S. military under the command of General George Crook.
And they were imprisoned at Fort Omaha, just waiting to be marched right back to the disease-ridden Indian Territory.
Right.
And this arrest is the spark for a monumental legal showdown. Because General Crook, interestingly enough, was actually highly sympathetic to the Ponca's plight.
He hated what he was ordered to do.
He quietly leaked the story to a local newspaper editor in Omaha, a man named Thomas Tibbles. Tibbles was a fiery abolitionist and a journalist, and he immediately saw the explosive legal potential of this situation.
He really did.
He hired lawyers, and they filed a lawsuit that became known as Standing Bear v. Crook.
Let's break down the mechanics of the law here because it's fascinating.
Please do.
The legal tool Tibbles' lawyers used was a writ of habeas corpus. For you listening, habeas corpus is one of the most fundamental legal rights in the English-speaking world. It literally translates to, "You shall have the body."
Right.
It is a demand that a prisoner be brought before a court so the government can legally justify why they are being detained. If the government cannot provide a lawful justification, the prisoner must be set free.
It's the ultimate check on arbitrary government power. But the U.S. government's defense strategy was chillingly simple, and it relied on a very specific legal loophole.
Yeah, this is the part that's hard to stomach.
When the government attorneys walked into the courtroom, their primary argument wasn't even that Standing Bear had broken a law.
No.
Their argument was that Standing Bear did not even have the right to file a writ of habeas corpus in the first place, because under U.S. law, a Native American was not legally considered a person.
It sounds completely absurd to modern ears, but we have to understand the legal mechanics of the 1870s.
Walk us through it.
The government was leaning heavily on previous interpretations of citizenship, notably tying back to the logic of the Dred Scott decision.
Wow, Dred Scott. That is a dark precedent.
And they relied on the precise wording of the 14th Amendment, which explicitly excluded Indians not taxed from citizenship. The government argued that because Standing Bear was part of a dependent tribal nation, he was essentially a ward of the state, an entity without individual constitutional rights.
So they're saying he literally doesn't exist as a legal entity.
The argument was literal. You cannot sue for your civil liberties because you are not a legal person capable of holding those liberties.
So the trial isn't just about going home to bury his son. It is a trial to prove basic humanity in the eyes of the law.
Exactly.
And the judge in this case, Judge Elmer Dundee, ultimately issues a landmark ruling on May 12, 1879. He obliterates the government's argument. He officially rules that an Indian is a person within the meaning of the laws of the United States and is therefore fully entitled to the writ of habeas corpus.
Which means the government had no legal justification to hold Standing Bear in peacetime.
Right, and he was freed. It is a massive watershed turning point for legal personhood rights in America.
It absolutely is. But for our purposes today, looking at how Native voices were recorded, we have to examine the emotional and rhetorical climax of this trial.
Yes, the speech.
Toward the end of the proceedings, Standing Bear was allowed to address the court.
And it becomes one of the most famous, visceral moments in Native history. Standing Bear stands up in this crowded federal courtroom. He holds out his hand toward the judge.
Just picture the tension in that room.
And through an interpreter, he is recorded as saying, "That hand is not the color of yours, but if I pierce it, I shall feel pain. If you pierce your hand, you also feel pain. The blood that will flow from mine will be the same color as yours. I am the same man. God made us both."
I am the same man.
That's so powerful.
It is a profound, stripped-down, undeniable assertion of shared biology and humanity, delivered in a room where federal attorneys were literally arguing he wasn't a human being in the eyes of the law.
Right.
But true to the driving tension of this deep dive, we have to look closely at the mediation here. How do we actually have this exact quote?
Right, because Standing Bear obviously spoke in the Ponca language during the trial.
Exactly. So we had another chain of translation. The words were rendered in the courtroom by a highly skilled interpreter, a young Omaha woman named Suzette LaFleche, who was also known by her translation name, Bright Eyes.
Okay, so that's the first step.
And the person who broadcasted this testimony to the world, the person who made sure it was printed in newspapers across the country, was Thomas Tibbles, the journalist who had initiated the lawsuit.
So once again, we are dealing with a heavy filter.
Yes, but this raises an important question about the nature of this specific filter, because the mediation provided by LaFleche and Tibbles was not malicious or adversarial.
No, they were on his side.
Right. In fact, they were deeply sympathetic, highly motivated reformers. Following the trial's success, Tibbles essentially built a massive national publicity campaign around Standing Bear.
He took him on tour.
They went on a speaking tour across the East Coast to raise money and advocate for Native rights.
It sounds exactly like a modern PR campaign. Like, Tibbles was the 19th century equivalent of a legal defense fund's campaign manager.
Precisely. And this is where the mechanics of 19th century activism come into play. Standing Bear's testimony survived, and it became instantly famous precisely because it was incredibly useful to a white reform movement's cause.
It was effective copy.
Tibbles knew how to work the press. He knew he needed a narrative that would appeal directly to the Christian, liberal, philanthropic sensibilities of the wealthy East Coast establishment, the people who could fund further lawsuits.
Right.
So while the underlying sentiment of Standing Bear's courtroom speech is undeniably his own, the historical record we rely on today is inextricably linked to its political utility for the people translating and publishing it.
It really makes you think about how public relations shapes human rights campaigns today. I mean, think about it. Whenever there is a massive injustice unfolding globally right now, a refugee crisis, a civil war, a blatant civil rights violation, raw grief, is almost never enough to move the needle on its own.
Sadly, it's not.
People are dying every day, and the world just ignores it. That grief almost always has to be carefully packaged into a digestible narrative.
It needs a face.
It usually requires a perfectly sympathetic protagonist saying something universally relatable, so that the dominant culture can finally bring itself to care.
That is exactly the dynamic at play with Standing Bear. His profound personal tragedy, the harrowing death of his son, the brutal arrest for simply trying to bury him, was channeled by Tibbles and LaFleche into a specific rhetorical format that the American legal and public systems could easily process.
It's brilliant, but it's curated.
The record we have is absolutely a testament to Standing Bear's immense resilience and courage, but it is also, undeniably, a testament to the mechanics of white reform activism.
Okay, so we've seen how Native voices were filtered for intellectual magazines with Chief Joseph, and how they were shaped for federal courtrooms and PR campaigns with Standing Bear in the late 1870s.
Both late in the era.
Right. Both of those men were speaking after they had been removed or defeated, and they were trying to navigate the white world's institutions. But what happens if we go backward in time?
To the earlier conflicts.
Yeah, if we look at the moments when the treaties were actively being drawn up, or when the wars over those lands were just ending, the role of the white transcriber becomes even more complicated.
Because in those earlier moments, you aren't dealing with polished essays or highly managed sympathetic reformers. You are dealing with real-time, chaotic clashes over land, military power, and basic survival.
The stakes are immediate.
The filters are much more raw.
Let's contrast two wildly different interactions with white intermediaries from this earlier period. I want to look at 10 Bears speaking at a massive treaty council and contrast that with Black Hawk dictating his autobiography after a war.
Let's start with 10 Bears, who is a prominent leader of the Yamparica Comanche. The year is 1867, and the setting is the Medicine Lodge Treaty Council in Kansas.
When I was looking through these sources, the Medicine Lodge Treaty Council completely broke my mental model of how this era worked.
How so?
I always pictured a treaty negotiation as, like, a quiet room, maybe in a fort, with a few guys in suits sitting across a wooden table from a chief.
A very civilized, quiet affair.
Yeah, but this was a massive logistical undertaking, right? Paint the sensory picture of what a treaty council actually looked like mechanically.
You have to picture a sprawling, temporary city springing up on the plains out of nowhere. The U.S. government arrived with a massive delegation of commissioners, heavily armed military escorts, supply wagons, and clerks.
Thousands of people.
And surrounding them were camps containing an estimated 5,000 members of the Southern Plains tribes: Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Apache.
Just a massive gathering.
You have multiple languages being spoken simultaneously. You have journalists from Eastern newspapers wandering around. The atmosphere is tense, chaotic, and incredibly high stakes.
And what was the actual goal?
The fundamental goal of the U.S. commissioners at Medicine Lodge was to convince these powerful nomadic horse cultures to completely give up their massive hunting territories and move on to confined agricultural reservations.
And 10 Bears is at the center of this. And crucially, he is not a defeated prisoner.
Not at all.
He is a powerful, respected leader negotiating in real time from a position of relative strength. And his speech to the commissioners is a flat-out, poetic, but unyielding refusal of reservation life.
And we know what he said because his words were recorded by the treaty's own chroniclers, the official clerks hired by the U.S. government to take the minutes of the negotiation.
The government's own stenographers.
10 Bears is recorded as saying, "I was born upon the prairie where the wind blew free, and there was nothing to break the light of the sun. I want to die there and not within walls."
I want to die there and not within walls. But he doesn't just stick to metaphors about the wind and the sun either.
No, he gets very specific.
He gets incredibly specific about the mechanics of the theft that is occurring. He directly names the culprits, stating bluntly that the Texans took the places where the grass grew the thickest and the timber was the best.
What's fascinating here is the sheer situational irony of the transcription.
Oh, it's amazing.
This is a real-time, highly sophisticated political argument. 10 Bears is outlining exactly, logically, why the treaty they are trying to force him to sign is fundamentally flawed, unjust, and impossible for his people to accept.
Right.
And the U.S. government clerks, sitting there with their inkwells, are diligently writing down the exact reasons the treaty they are promoting is doomed to fail.
They are literally transcribing their own indictment.
Yeah.
They're documenting the exact logic of the resistance they are about to face.
Yes. And because it is recorded in the official bureaucratic council proceedings, it carries a very different kind of documentary weight than a newspaper article.
It's official federal record.
It is a refusal caught in the amber of federal minutes. It is mediated by the government's clerks, sure, but the defiance remains sharp and structural.
Now let's contrast that real-time, official bureaucratic recording with what happened to the great Sauk war leader, Black Hawk. This takes us back further in time to the early 1830s.
Right. Black Hawk had led a fierce military resistance against the removal of his people from their lands in Illinois, a conflict which ended in disaster for his people in what we now call the Black Hawk War.
And in September 1832, he finally surrendered to U.S. forces.
And following his surrender and imprisonment in 1833, he dictated an autobiography. It was titled Life of Makatai Machi Kiakiak, or Black Hawk.
Such a landmark book.
This is incredibly important because it is one of the earliest Native American as-told-to narratives in existence. It set the template for the entire genre.
It is a foundational text of American literature, but it presents the transcription problem we've been discussing in its earliest and perhaps most glaring form.
Oh, absolutely.
Because with Black Hawk, we aren't just dealing with a single clerk. We have a heavy two-step double filter.
Walk us through the mechanics of this double filter. How did a physical book by a recently defeated Native leader actually get published in 1833?
Well, step one involves the linguistic barrier. Black Hawk did not speak English.
Right.
So he dictated his life story orally to a government-appointed interpreter named Antoine Leclerc. Now, Leclerc was of French and Potawatomi descent, and while he was bilingual, translating complex Sauk political philosophy, spiritual beliefs, and military strategy into 1830s, American English requires massive linguistic leaps.
It's not a one-to-one translation.
Not at all. So that is filter number one, the oral translation, which inherently alters nuance. Then Leclerc's rough notes were handed over to a young, ambitious newspaperman named John B. Patterson.
The editor.
Patterson is the one who actually wrote the book. He structured the narrative, smoothed out the prose, and prepared it for the printing press. That is filter number two, the editorial shaping.
And Patterson's target demographic obviously wasn't the Sauk people.
No, Patterson was a businessman. He was writing specifically for a white American readership.
A white American readership that had literally just finished fighting a bloody war against Black Hawk the year before.
Exactly. So Patterson had to walk a very fine line. He had to present Black Hawk as a formidable, respectable enemy, but one who was ultimately safely defeated.
Safely in the past.
So throughout the text, you get these moments of intense, dramatic defiance. For example, in the surviving record of his surrender speech, which was incorporated into the narrative, Black Hawk is quoted as saying, "Black Hawk is an Indian. He has done nothing for which an Indian ought to be ashamed. He has fought for his countrymen, the squaws and papooses, against white men who came year after year to cheat them and take away their lands."
Oh, okay, wait, I have to push back here because I'm struggling with this text.
Go ahead.
Black Hawk is an Indian. He has done nothing for which an Indian ought to be ashamed. It sounds incredibly dramatic, but it sounds almost too perfect. If John B. Patterson structured and packaged Black Hawk's life specifically to sell books to a white audience, an audience that was totally fascinated by the literary trope of the noble but doomed savage, how can we trust any of the defiance in that book?
That's the million-dollar question.
Isn't it highly likely that Patterson is just writing the exact character he knows his readers want to buy? He is giving them a safe thrill.
You have just articulated the exact debate that literary scholars and historians have been having about this book for over a century.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
How much of this text is Black Hawk's genuine structural political philosophy, and how much of it is Patterson's cynical commodification of that voice to sell copies?
It's impossible to completely untangle.
Scholars argue endlessly over where Black Hawk's mind ends and Patterson's pen begins. The book is invaluable because it is one of the only full-length narratives we have from that era, but it carries a massive caution warning built right into its own title page. You can never separate the subject from the editor.
It is the ultimate commodification of grief and resistance. Patterson is literally packaging Black Hawk's military defeat, styling the dialogue like a stage play, and selling it back to the very people who defeated him.
And that profound problem, this idea of white audiences desperately wanting a very specific, stylized, romanticized version of native defiance, leads us perfectly into the most ubiquitous, beloved quotes of the entire treaty era.
Yes. This brings us all the way back to the opening hook of this deep dive. The floating quotes.
The ones on the posters.
The lines that everyone knows, the lines printed on the posters, but that nobody can actually pin down.
We are talking about the famous, highly rhetorical quotes attributed to Plains leaders like Red Cloud and Sitting Bull.
Before we get to the famous mystery quote about the broken promises, let's establish the baseline of what we actually do know about Red Cloud's words. Because Red Cloud, the brilliant Oglala Lakota leader, did speak on the record, didn't he?
He absolutely did, and the context of his public speaking is vital. Red Cloud is a towering, unique figure in this history. He is arguably the one Plains leader who definitively won his war against the United States military,
Red Cloud's War.
which took place from 1866 to 1868. He successfully blockaded the Bozeman Trail, and he forced the United States to completely abandon its forts in Powder River country. This military victory led directly to the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, which the U.S. signed on his terms.
So unlike Chief Joseph or Black Hawk, when Red Cloud speaks, he has immense proven political and military capital. He is dealing from a position of strength.
Yes, and he understood how to use that capital. On June 16, 1870, he traveled east and delivered a highly authenticated, widely reported address at Cooper Union in New York City. The New York Times printed the transcript the very next day.
Wait, Cooper Union, that's the exact same stage where Abraham Lincoln gave his famous speech that propelled him to the presidency?
Exactly the same place.
Yeah. Red Cloud is speaking at the absolute epicenter of American intellectual and political life. But I'm a little confused here. He literally just won a war against the U.S. military. Why is he standing on a stage in New York City?
It's a great question.
Shouldn't he just be out west dictating terms from a position of absolute power? What is his strategy here?
His strategy was incredibly farsighted. Red Cloud realized that winning a localized war was not enough to guarantee long-term survival against the industrial might of the United States.
The U.S. Army would always come back.
Right. He went east to build political alliances. And what's fascinating is the tone of his authenticated Cooper Union speech. It is not full of fire and brimstone.
What did he say?
It is a highly calculated, nuanced appeal for sympathetic Northerners, the same people who had just fought the Civil War to end slavery, to hold their own government to its word. According to the New York Times reports, he said, "We do not want riches, but we want to train our children right. Riches would do us no good. We could not take them with us to the other world. We do not want riches. We want peace and love."
We want to train our children right. That is so incredibly grounded and practical. It lacks the dramatic flair of a Hollywood movie, but it is deeply real.
It is the speech of an elder statesman.
Yeah.
He was actively working in the American public sphere, trying to leverage public opinion against the military bureaucrats who wanted to break the treaty he had just won.
Okay, so we have Red Cloud in 1870 giving a nuanced, practical, highly political speech that is meticulously recorded by the New York Times.
Verified and documented.
Why, then, does the most famous quote attributed to him lack any verified origin? Let me read it again. "They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it."
Such a great quote.
If he actually said it, why isn't it in a newspaper or a Treaty Council transcript or a magazine article somewhere?
Because it is highly likely he never actually said it in exactly those polished words. Or if he did, it wasn't recorded contemporaneously. This quote is most often vaguely attributed to Red Cloud in old age, which is a classic historical red flag for a fabricated or heavily edited quote. But the plot thickens, because if you look through different history books, this exact same quote is frequently attributed to Sitting Bull instead.
Wait, seriously, the exact same sentence is assigned interchangeably to two completely different, immensely famous Lakota leaders who had very different political strategies.
Yes. And neither attribution can be anchored to a firmly documented contemporaneous occasion. There is no original source document for it.
So who actually wrote it? If they didn't say it, how did it become so famous?
This is where we have to understand the mechanics of how popular history was written and consumed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Reporters, sympathetic white friends, and later historians would spend time with these leaders in their later years on the reservations.
Gathering material.
Right. They would hear the overarching sentiment, the profound, undeniable, structural truth that the government had broken every single promise and taken all the land. And over decades of retelling, white writers essentially smoothed out those complex, multi-layered, localized political grievances into easily digestible, punchy folk summaries.
They act like script doctors. They take the raw emotion and punch up the dialogue to make it more memorable.
Exactly. We see this exact same dynamic with another incredibly famous quote, usually attributed to Sitting Bull. You will often see this printed in textbooks. "What treaty that the whites have kept has the red man broken? Not one. What treaty that the white man ever made with us have they kept? Not one."
It's beautifully rhetorical. It has a perfect symmetrical cadence.
It is structurally perfect, and it reaches us through early reporters and later through the work of prominent historians like Robert Utley. Now, is the sentiment authentic? Absolutely.
Much as his actions.
It is completely consistent with Sitting Bull's well-documented views and his fierce resistance. It is almost certainly what he believed in his core. But like nearly all his recorded words, it comes to us through thick layers of oral translation, handwritten transcription, and later editorial polishing by white writers who knew what sounded good on a page.
The slipperiness of these quotes is the whole point, isn't it? The exact phrasing was curated by intermediaries. We have the genuine, undeniable grievance of the native leader, but the syntax, the rhythm, the vocabulary that belongs to the white historian.
The pattern is unmistakable across all the Plains figures we study. The grievance is deeply historically attested. The exact poster-ready wording almost never is.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you want to see the extreme absolute edge of this transcription dynamic, we have to look at a moment where there was no PR campaign.
No one trying to sell books.
There was no newspaper reporter looking for a scoop and no historian trying to write a snappy quote for a book. We have to look at a moment of sheer apocalyptic catastrophe.
You're talking about the tragedy of 4 bears.
Yes, 4 bears, whose Mandan name was Matotop, was the second chief of the Mandan people. He was a highly noted warrior, a brilliant diplomat, and a man who had famously hosted white visitors.
He was a famous figure even back then.
He had been painted in stunning detail by famous visiting artists like George Catlin and Carl Bodmer in the early 1830s. He was known as a steadfast friend to the Americans. But in 1837, his entire world ended.
1837 was the year of a catastrophic smallpox epidemic that swept with terrifying speed up the Missouri River.
Unimaginable horror.
The disease was carried on American Fur Company steamboats. And the Mandan people who lived in dense, permanent Earth Lodge villages were hit incredibly hard. Their population went from thousands down to a reported few dozen within a matter of weeks.
It was an absolute annihilation of a civilization.
And 4 bears contracted smallpox. On July 30, 1837, as he was dying at Fort Clark on the Missouri River, his family dead or dying around him, he delivered a speech.
And this speech is undoubtedly the darkest, most agonizing note in our entire deep dive. It is a bitter, devastating curse against the white men he had spent his life protecting and trading with.
What did he say?
He says he had always loved the whites, that he had never wronged a white man, and now, in return for his friendship, he would die with my face rotten among those same white dogs.
It is a harrowing, skin-crawling piece of text. But once again, keeping our critical methodology intact, we have to look at the mechanics of the filter. How do we possibly know what a dying man said inside a quarantined fort during a horrific plague?
We only know it because of a man named Francis Chardon.
Right, Francis Chardon was a white fur trader who was stationed at Fort Clark. This dying curse survives in one place and one place only, Francis Chardon's personal journal.
So even in his final moments of ultimate betrayal, physical agony, and death, 4 Bears' final words to the world could only reach history through the pen of the very people his words condemned.
And we have to be incredibly, painstakingly careful here because historians hotly debate the authenticity of this speech. The words are entirely in Chardon's phrasing. Chardon was a notoriously unreliable narrator. He had his own agenda, his own penchant for dramatic flair, and crucially, his own massive psychological guilt regarding the epidemic, as the traders were the ones who brought the disease on their steamboats and failed to quarantine the victims. We have to treat this speech as attributed, not confirmed.
It is deeply chilling. The fur trader, who literally facilitated the arrival of the plague, is the one who gets to write the dramatic script for the victim's dying breath. He controls the narrative of his own victim.
It is the ultimate encapsulation of the power dynamic we've been discussing. The absolute control of the historical narrative remained firmly in the hands of the intermediaries, even at the literal end of the world.
Which brings us to the final, and undoubtedly the most extreme, section of our deep dive. If 4 Bears' dying curse was filtered by a guilty fur trader's journal, and Red Cloud's famous quotes were polished by historians over decades, and Black Hawk's life was shaped by an ambitious editor to sell books, what happens when the transcriber simply decides to drop the pretense entirely and invent the native voice from scratch?
This is the ultimate cautionary case. This is the bizarre, sprawling story of Chief Seattle.
Chief Seattle, or Seattle, was the respected leader of the Duwamish and Suquamish peoples in the Pacific Northwest. He is a very real, very important historical figure. The modern city of Seattle is named after him.
He was a major political player.
He navigated complex politics and was a key signatory of the 1855 Treaty of Point Elliott. But today, in the 21st century, if you know the name Chief Seattle, you probably know him for one specific thing.
You know him for a deeply moving, incredibly eloquent, environmentally conscious speech. A speech that has been printed on millions of posters, read in countless elementary school classrooms, quoted by politicians, and used as the moral bedrock of the modern ecology movement.
And the incredible truth is that the speech everyone knows is almost entirely fake.
It is completely unreliable as historical testimony. To understand how a fake speech mechanically becomes accepted global gospel, we have to peel back the 2 distinct layers of this fabrication.
Let's peel the onion. Layer 1. The first reconstruction.
Right. Chief Seattle allegedly delivered a speech to Governor Isaac Stevens during treaty negotiations. The exact date is heavily disputed, but it is most often cited as occurring in 1854. Here is the foundational, crucial fact. The speech went completely unrecorded at the time. No clerk, no journalist, no military officer wrote it down when it happened.
0 transcripts exist from 1854. The archive is totally blank.
Correct. Now, 33 years go by. It is now October 29th, 1887. A man named Dr. Henry A. Smith publishes a reconstructed, highly flowery version of the speech in a local newspaper called the Seattle Sunday Star.
Okay, 33 years later.
Smith claims he is working from extensive notes he took during the original speech 3 decades prior, but mysteriously, those notes have never been found by any historian.
And even if he had some scribbled notes, let's think about the actual linguistic mechanics of that interaction in 1854. Chief Seattle didn't speak English.
No, Seattle spoke Lushootseed. So if he gave a complex diplomatic speech to the governor, he would have spoken Lushootseed. It then would have been translated by an intermediary into Chinook jargon.
Right.
Now, Chinook jargon was a regional trade language. It is incredibly important to understand how trade jargons function mechanically. They only have a vocabulary of a few hundred words. They are designed for trading salmon and blankets, not for conveying nuanced, poetic, philosophical treatises on the nature of existence.
It's a functional language.
And then, from that limited Chinook jargon, it would have been translated again into English for the Americans to understand.
So Dr. Smith, sitting at his desk 33 years later, is writing down a speech that supposedly survived a game of telephone that went from Lushootseed to a highly limited trade jargon to English. And he publishes a text that is full of incredibly dense, flowery Victorian poetry.
Exactly. He is writing it through a heavy, romanticized 19th century sensibility, so even the 1887 version is highly suspect. It is, at best, a decades-late reconstruction heavily influenced by Dr. Smith's own literary aspirations. But here is the craziest part. That 1887 text is not even the version most people know today.
Now, prepare yourselves for layer 2. The wholesale Hollywood fabrication.
Fast forward from 1887 to the early 1970s. The modern environmental movement is gaining massive cultural traction. The first Earth Day just happened. People are concerned about pollution. A screenwriter named Ted Perry is hired by a film commission to write a script for a movie about ecology and pollution.
A Hollywood screenwriter. In 1971, writing a movie script.
Yes. And Perry decides to use Dr. Smith's murky 1887 text as a loose inspiration, but he heavily rewrites it. He adds all these sweeping, modern, ecological laments that were totally relevant to 1971 but made no sense in 1854.
Like what?
He writes lines like, "The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth." He writes about the buffalo being shot from trains, which Chief Seattle, living in the Pacific Northwest, had never even seen.
The earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. I literally had that exact quote printed on a spiral notebook in middle school. I thought it was ancient indigenous wisdom.
Millions of people did, but Ted Perry wrote that line in a modern office, not Chief Seattle in 1854, Ted Perry in 1971.
But mechanically, how did a draft of a screenplay become universally accepted as historical fact? How did that mistake happen?
It happened through a series of chaotic production mishaps. Perry never intended to pass it off as genuine history. He was just doing his job writing a movie. But when the film was finally produced, his attribution as the writer was somehow lost or removed by the producers. The text of the speech started circulating independently of the film. And because it sounded exactly like what white, environmentally conscious Americans in the 1970s desperately wanted a wise, mystical Native American elder to sound like, they completely embraced it as authentic ancient wisdom.
They just accepted it.
They didn't check the sources because the myth confirmed their own modern biases perfectly.
It is the most darkly ironic thing I have ever heard. It's like we broke the treaties, we violently took the land, we forced the people onto reservations, and then a century later, we hired a Hollywood screenwriter to invent a script where the native leaders graciously absolve us by just becoming these mystical, passive stewards of the environment.
It's tragic, honestly.
Who literally put modern words in his mouth because it made us feel better about the ecology movement in the 1970s.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the ultimate act of historical erasure. Chief Seattle was a real, highly capable political leader. He navigated incredibly difficult, dangerous treaty negotiations. He had to make devastating compromises to try and protect his people from annihilation. But his actual historical reality, his complex political agency, was completely erased and replaced by a white screenwriter's fictional fabrication.
It is the absolute logical conclusion of the transcription problem we've been tracing this entire time. We went from Charles Erskine Scott Wood polishing Chief Joseph's poetry at Bear Paw, to Thomas Tibbles managing Standing Bear's PR campaign in Omaha, to historians smoothing out Red Cloud's complex grievances, and finally to Ted Perry just sitting at a typewriter and writing the dialogue from scratch.
Which is exactly why Chief Seattle serves as the ultimate cautionary example. It proves why we must always ask who is holding the pen. When you strip away the romanticism, the Hollywood tropes, and the Victorian poetry, the historical record we have of these incredible leaders is a product of the people who conquered them.
Okay, let's unpack this and synthesize the massive journey we've been on today. We started this deep dive with a clear mission to cut through the bureaucratic paperwork and hear what the counterparties said when the treaties were broken.
And we found some incredible things.
We found Chief Joseph brilliantly subverting the system, using the North American Review to demand equal legal rights under the Constitution. We saw Standing Bear win legal personhood in a federal courtroom, but only because his raw grief was amplified and packaged by white publicists. We saw 10 Bears at Medicine Lodge refusing the reservation, his eloquent defiance ironically recorded by the very clerks of the government that was trying to confine him.
We saw Black Hawk's life commodified by an ambitious editor looking for a bestseller. We heard the darkest dying curse of 4 bears filtered entirely through a guilty fur trader's diary. And we ended with Chief Seattle's legacy being entirely hijacked and rewritten by a modern screenwriter to sell an environmental message.
The grief we've discussed today was profoundly real. The political sophistication of these leaders was undeniable, their legal arguments were incredibly sharp, but the transcripts we rely on to understand them are inherently distorted. The historical record itself is a product of the people who broke the treaties. So what does this all mean?
This raises an important question, and it is something for you to think about long after this deep dive ends. This isn't just about 19th century history, it is about how we consume information right now. Today, we constantly consume endless sound bites, translated statements, and viral quotes from marginalized people across the globe who are fighting for their rights, fighting for their land, and fighting for their basic survival. Building on what we've learned today about the Chief Seattle fabrication, about the polished surrender speeches, about the PR campaigns, how many of the voices we read in the news today are actually just screenplay versions written by modern intermediaries?
The next time you read a translation or a perfectly curated quote on your feed, ask yourself, whose agenda is really shaping the narrative you are allowed to hear? Who holds the pen?
Because as we learned at the very beginning of this deep dive, the most famous, most perfect quote summarizing an entire era of history.
They made us many promises, more than I can remember, but they never kept but one. They promised to take our land, and they took it.
Might just be a ghost story written by the victors.